Let me come to the second point of discussion, which is uh, the hijab ban and constitutional perspective versus religious practice. Now, I would start by going with what has been said in the court judgment on the hijab issue. On the hijab issue, the court has taken a stand that wearing a hijab is not part of the essential practices of the Muslim faith. Now, I think this is a very important point, and why I'm saying this is a lot of segments of the Muslim community who do not endorse the wearing of the hijab have actually been protected as a result of this High Court statement. Now, I want you to keep in mind, suppose the High Court had said that wearing the hijab is part of the essential practice of Islam. I want you to just imagine what the consequences of that would have been. Those elements within Islam, I don't want to use the word progressive or conservative, but those people within the Islamic faith who do not use the hijab, who prefer not to use the hijab and move around, what would have happened, or what would have been the pressures from the religion and religious leaders on such women who were not using the hijab, when you declare that the hijab is a essential practice of the religion. So in a sense, what the judgment has done is it has provided a safeguard for a lot of people in the Muslim community who do not want to follow the practice of the hijab. Now, that is one point which I thought it's important all of you keep in mind. Now, secondly, I would want you to look at the hijab controversy in the backdrop of the developments which led up to it. Now, my own personal view, when the controversy started, you could well have nipped it in the bud. You could well have stopped it at that stage itself. But what happened? All political groups wanted to take mileage out of the controversy. All political groups, those who came out in favor of the hijab, thought that this would be a good opportunity for them to gain political currency. Those who fought against the hijab, and especially if they were non-Muslims from the majority community, from the Hindu community, they saw that as an opportunity to try and convince a new emerging generation of voters and polarize society on this issue. So both groups were very keen to take forward the fight. And both groups were very keen to take very strong positions on this issue, which were at opposite ends of the spectrum, and did not allow room for a negotiated settlement on this issue to come up. Now, is it a fact that the children who insisted on wearing the hijab were not wearing it earlier and then suddenly started wearing it? Is it also true that children who were wearing the hijab when entering the college or school took it off before going into the classroom and then decided to stop taking it off before going into the classroom? Now, these are all issues that we need to debate. What the rule says is wearing the hijab when getting into an institution is not the problem. The problem is the dress code and the uniform code needs to be followed inside the classroom. In the classroom, that hijab should not be worn when you come out. I have seen in all institutions I have worked, girls coming to the college wearing a hijab, wearing a full burqa sometimes, getting into the institution, going to the change room, taking off that, and then not using anything to cover the face when going into the classroom. And when leaving the campus again, you put on the dress and go. Now, I have seen this practice for several years in institutions. So, has this controversy emerged because of the polarization that you see in society? Both a majority polarization and a minority polarization. You see a minority polarization because of a perceived threat. I'm using the word perceived because a perceived threat to their identity. So many things you did not do in the past, you wanted to do because you now say it's a question of identity. You are also allowing children to come under pressure to be able to be requiring to follow this because of family pressure, community pressure, and the like. And on the other hand, you have this majority consolidation where you say this country is majorly following a particular religion, and why should this concession be made to a minority group, especially a minority group whose population is growing. Now these are the arguments that are made there. You see what happened immediately after the hijab controversy when some girls insisted on wearing the hijab to the college. Next day, you have another group wearing a saffron shawl to the college. Now, so reaction, counter reaction, counter reaction, and then it spirals out of control. And when it spirals out of control, remember, you have people who have taken very clear positions on this issue and who will not backtrack then, who will not backtrack after having taken such a position. So ultimately, I would say it has not become an issue relating to the hijab. It has become today a bone of contention between two contesting ways of thinking on the issue. The hijab has gone to the background. Other issues have today come to the forefront in terms of religious identity. So I would still say the best position to go back to is the original position. I think if a girl or a woman wants to wear it when getting into an education institution, that should be fine. And what should not be possibly allowed is in the classroom, that should be worn. What should not be allowed is wearing that in the classroom. That I think would be a fair a norm that you impose with regard to the hijab. So this is where I would stop the points I would like to make on this. But if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise those questions. Remember, as I have been speaking, I have used certain terms which those who are appearing for the interview should carefully use. I have used words like perceived, I have used words like alleged, or I have used words like believed to be. And that's very important that you use such terms, especially when you're talking of very emotive issues before a group. It's not that I'm saying you don't state your points, but your point should be so stated in a very persuasive language is what I suggest. Yes, quickly, any questions before I move on to the next thing? Prashant, any questions from your side to start off with again?
Should judiciary have a say specifically on these matters, sir, and how far the judiciary can go on defining every such thing that can come of it?
Now, political players have found it convenient to leave it to the judiciary. You see, it's not that the judiciary should intervene, But what has happened is political players have tossed the ball to the judiciary's court. And I'm not just talking of hijab. You see all controversial issues. What do those in power say? We are doing this because the court has told us to do it. So we are not doing this. We are doing this because the court has directed us to do it. So political players are taking refuge under the guise of saying that this is a court directive that we are trying to implement. So why is it that the court is being required to intervene on each issue? It is simply because different political players are pushing the issue to the court because they don't want to take responsibility for having taken a stand. They find it more convenient to say, we will do what the court directs you to do. So this is a byproduct of political parties not wanting to take a responsibility for a stand. And this is not new, Prashant. Go back right to the Mandal Commission implementation. Ultimately, the court had to intervene and take a stand on OBC reservation. That reservation cannot exceed 50%. And then all political parties said, no, you see, what can we do? We wanted to give reservations, but the court is coming in the way. So it becomes convenient for political parties to pass the buck to the court and believe that the court is insulated. Santosh, what do you mean by is there a provision to protest against a court order? Now, remember, you can criticize a court judgment. However, you cannot impute motives to the judge for having taken that judgment. Now, this is an important distinction that needs to be made. There are several writings which are critical of the judicial judgments. But of course, you have to use the right language when being critical. If you open newspapers, you will find several articles which are critical of court judgments. However, in your criticism of court judgments, you cannot impute motives to the judges as to why they took a particular stand. That would be then considered as a contempt of the court, and that could lead to legal proceedings against you. So there is no ban or bar on saying that there is a miscarriage of justice or saying that justice has not been done in this case. I think people are free to say that. What you are not free to do is impute motives to a decision of the judge. Now, Suma asked the question. Let me read out Suma's question. Suma says, should reforms be held hostage to the wishes of conservative elements in any communities? Suma, who defines what is conservative and what is not conservative? You see, now remember, these are all subjective. These are all subjective factors. What you say conservative, somebody else may say progressive. What you say progressive, somebody else may say is ultra liberal. So at the end of the day, who defines what is conservative and what is progressive? And I'm not just talking of hijab. You see, as a university vice chancellor, should I prescribe a uniform for my students? Should I prescribe in detail a dress code for my students? I would say no. I would say as long as my students and faculty conform to certain norms of decency, which I will define, let them wear what they want to wear. Now, am I being conservative? Am I being progressive? Am I being liberal? Now, Suma, that depends upon the vision that you have. You see, somebody may tell me, oh, you are being too liberal. We must be very strict in our rules on how people should dress up. So this whole point on who is conservative and what is not conservative, Suma, I would say that's very very subjective. Those of you who stay in a hostel, should hostels have a time by which you should return to the hostel? Again, we have a debate, yes or no. Now, if you say yes, there should be a return time, are you being conservative? And then if you say no, yes is, return time is a question of discipline, then the question comes, what is the return time? Should it be 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock? Now, again, if you say 10 o'clock, are you being too liberal? If you say 8 o'clock, are you being too conservative? Now, at the end of the day, how do you define what is conservative and what is liberal? I would say to that, Suma, we need to leave it to the judgment of an individual to decide what he or she wants to do, as long as it is within the larger norms which are laid down. Now, there is a boundary within which I can operate. I know the boundaries, but within the boundaries, there needs to be sufficient space for me to negotiate what stand or what position I will take on that particular issue. So hope I have responded to Suma's question adequately.